Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Hapanmo TV. Well, we're almost at the point that I've been waiting for and looking into, dreading in a way, although not quite, and I'll explain why in a little while, for a very long time, for as long as I've been conspiratorially aware. It concerns something that's going to happen on Friday. Something that's going to happen on Friday that has been planned for a long time. And this is the so-called grand finale of the Cassini spacecraft. Now, NASA, you'll be pleased to know, if you like this sort of thing, are actually streaming it live. So you'll be able to watch it on live. And I would do that, but I'm not going to be able to because I'll be on my way to the UFO Truth Magazine conference where I'm speaking. So I'll have to watch it. I have to watch a recording when I come home. But I'm very, very keen to watch it and see what happens. Because of something that I've been looking into, as I said, for a long time. Something that used to be talked about an awful lot, more than is talked about now. But something I still want to investigate. And that is a little plan that the powers that be might have connected to the Cassini spacecraft, known as the Lucifer Project. I'll explain. Now, the Cassini-Huygens spacecraft is one of the most successful space exploration missions of all time. At least that has been publicly admitted. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, yes, but Ben, what about the secret space program? You know, anti-gravity, free energy, blah, 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 blah. You know, Nazi bell, stuff like that. All right, I know. For the sake of this particular subject, I'm not going to mention the secret space program. I'm going to talk purely about the public space program and describe this particular issue from the point of view of the public space program. Just see it through the public space program's position. Okay, so the Cassini-Huygens project is one of the most successful space missions that has ever been created. It's been built with several different agencies: NASA, the European Space Agency, Italian Space Agency, etc. And it's broken some amazing records. I think it's the longest active space mission of all time. The spacecraft was launched way back in 1997, almost 20 years ago. And it flew to Saturn, which took a long time because Saturn's a long way away. Took 7 years, arrived 2004. Yeah, and it flew past Venus, it came back to Earth, went past Jupiter. Quite a lot of things like that. And by the time you get to Saturn, I think there's a 2-hour gap between when, in terms of simply this limited by the speed of light, because the Saturn is so far away. The speed of light means that any radio signals to and from the spacecraft take 2 hours to get there, 2 hours each way. Which means that if you're watching the grand finale on Friday, you won't be able to see the actual grand finale as it happens. The live stream will not be live; it'll be literally 2 hours after it actually happens. So you'll be seeing it. It's going to crash into the actual crash is going to happen at, I think, 11:30 British summertime on Friday. However, you won't actually be able to watch it until about 2 hours later, 1:30 British summertime. That's when the signals, the final signal, including the details of the grand finale, reach Earth. It's that simple. There's no way around that. It's simply the laws of physics. Yes, because the Cassini-Huygens has done an amazing thing. It's the first spacecraft to travel to the outer planets and to enter orbit, to actually enter orbit around Saturn. It also achieved the first landing ever of any object in the outer solar system. What it did was the Huygens spacecraft in 2005 landed on the moon Titan, which is really quite an amazing place. Titan has this thick atmosphere, it's very cold, and it has liquid methane on there, so instead of water, it's made mostly of, it's an amazing thing, made mostly of ice. Really quite incredible. So it's been going all the way around Saturn ever since, orbiting many times, gathering images of the moons, of the rings, things like that. enormous amount of data has been passed, and has increased our knowledge of the ringed planet enormously. Now, what's interesting is its power source. This is what makes these spacecraft very unusual. Now, many spacecraft are powered by solar panels. If you look at the International Space Station, it is powered by solar panels. However, when you're close to the sun, you can do that. However, if you go to the outer planets, it gets a bit difficult because the sun's rays are not powerful enough for it to be worth using solar panels on a spacecraft. So the spacecraft has to have an internal power source, and there's only one possible fuel supply that will actually work, which is compact enough and energetic enough to actually put on a spacecraft like that, and that is nuclear power. And so the actual spacecraft is powered by radioactive decay, a natural decay of plutonium-239 in the form of plutonium dioxide pellets. And these little lumps of plutonium dioxide, plutonium is extremely toxic. It's what is created in the nuclear weapons program, and they actually glow with heat, simply caused by the natural radioactive decay of the actual atoms. It's atomic fission. The same thing you get in a nuclear power station or a nuclear bomb. This then creates an electric current. It can actually essentially acts as an electric generator by something called thermoelectrics, and this basically powers the spacecraft into all its electrical systems. Now, several spacecraft have had this type of fuel. All the spacecraft for the outer solar system, such as New Horizons, which went to Pluto, the Galileo probe, which went to Jupiter. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. But the fuel load that Cassini has is the largest ever. We have 73 pounds on board this spacecraft of plutonium-238. This is much bigger than, say, the Galileo probe, which had 17 pounds of plutonium-238. Now, as I said, the Galileo spacecraft comes into this discussion again in a little while. Now, why is this a problem? Well, according to NASA, the only problem with this fuel source is that if they let Cassini continue orbiting around the rings of Saturn for eternity, sooner it won't be for eternity, sooner or later it's going to crash into one of the moons. Sooner or later there's going to be a collision. It's going to crash into one of the moons or the rings, and there's going to be contamination from that radioactive waste. This is almost completely decayed now. It's almost run out of this fuel, which is why they're terminating the mission. So you end up with like decayed plutonium-239. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but it's far more toxic than the original source, like the spent fuel rods in a nuclear reactor. And so if that lands on a moon, if that contaminates a moon, it could damage some of the life which may be there underneath the surface of the ice, or on Titan, or one of these places. The scientists are now claiming there might be life on some of these moons, like Enceladus. There might be life underneath the ice, and because there's water down there. So, according to the NASA, the flight directors, the purpose of the grand finale is to protect any potential life in the Saturnian system by crashing the craft onto the planet. So what you're going to have is the Cassini spacecraft is going to descend onto the planet Saturn. It'll never reach the surface, which is the gaseous surface of the planet, because it will burn up in the atmosphere. But that means that the craft will be safely out of the way. It'll be deorbited. It'll be safely out of the way, and it won't do any harm. So this is why they're doing it. But well, there's another side to this which I want to talk about now. Now, one of the most interesting characters in the world of science fiction is, without a doubt, Arthur C. Clarke. Now, I went through a phase when I was a kind of teenager in my early 20s when I was obsessed with the fiction of Arthur C. Clarke. He's not only a brilliant scientist who invented the communication satellite, which governs our world today, but he was a brilliant science fiction author, and his books, I actually adored them. I've sort of, I wouldn't like to say I've grown out of them, but I've moved on from them now. But one of his most interesting books, the series of books, I'd say, is definitely the Space Odyssey series. Now, there are a number of these particular books. Now, you may be familiar. You may have seen the film 2001: A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick. And it's interesting, incidentally, that Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke are extremely, are very, very, very closely linked. And I've talked about Kubrick before in previous videos, and on Hapanmo Radio as well, and about that Stanley Kubrick was the most amazing film director of all. And it's interesting that the 1968, when the 2001 Space Odyssey was made into a film, it was written as a book at the same time. It wasn't the film wasn't adapted from the book, but Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke created the story at the same time, and the book and the film were both released at the same time. The book was published, and the film was released in 1968. 1968 was also the year when the first manned mission to the moon took place, Apollo 8. And many people have claimed, Carl James, for example, very interesting chap, he's been on Hapanmo Radio, that Stanley Kubrick was involved with the Apollo missions in the sense that he was needed to fake some of the Apollo missions. Now, I don't personally believe that Stanley Kubrick actually willingly participated in hoaxing the moon landings, in this fraud, but it's possible some of his services were unwittingly involved. I don't believe he would do that. I think he had too much principles. He was he was a man of moral courage. Yet it's possible that he inadvertently, unwillingly, found himself in this position where some of his work was used. That's a big subject, too big for this particular story, but too big for this particular film. But let's just go forward. Let's just explore this particular series of books, the Space Odyssey series. It begins, as very famously, the first story, 2001: A Space Odyssey. You've probably seen the movie, with the discovery of an extraterrestrial artifact on the moon, a black monolith. Now, what's many people don't know is that there was the 2001: A Space Odyssey is just the first in a series of books. There is actually a whole, I think there are, how many are there? I mean, only read the first 3. I think there was a couple more before Clarke died. He wrote a couple more, and I think he collaborated with a ghostwriter for he did this with his last few books. His last few books were really rubbish because he basically used a bloody ghostwriter for most of them. But the second book in it was called 2010 Odyssey 2. Now, this is very, very interesting because it's not very well known. This is a much less well-known story. The book it's the sequel. It's the sequel to 2001, but it's much less well known. It's not as widely read. And there was a film adapted from it, which is much less well known than 2001. It was a different director. It was not Kubrick. But it carries on from the plot of 2001. If you remember, at the end of 2001, the spacecraft ends up in orbit around Saturn. They changed it to Jupiter in 2010. They decided to alter the story slightly, and it's all a mystery. The crew disappear after the computer goes crazy. This is a second mission, which is a joint Soviet-American mission, to send a craft to the moon, to Jupiter, to investigate what happened. And when they get there, they find the remains of the spacecraft, the Discovery. But they also find there's a giant monolith there, because a copy of the original one they found on the moon, but much bigger. I think it's about a mile long or something. At the end, okay, there's some spoilers here. Okay. But at the end, what happens is the monolith actually descends into the atmosphere of Jupiter and turns it into a star. Now, this is a particular aspect of this. This is an interesting little aspect of this. The way it happens is that because the gas giants, Jupiter and Saturn, are made essentially of highly compacted liquid hydrogen. And hydrogen is the most common element in the universe. It's very, very volatile. It easily forms compounds and things like that. And what they do is the gas giants are sometimes called failed stars because essentially their chemistry is the same as a star, like the sun, except that the mass of the planet is not big enough for it to achieve nuclear fusion and therefore become a star. However, the idea is, in the book 2010: A Space Odyssey, is that the monolith actually goes down into the atmosphere, and it starts making copies of itself, which then converts the hydrogen of Jupiter's body, Jupiter's surface and atmosphere, into heavier elements. So it's like an alchemy, it's an alchemical kind of thing. And after that, the mass of Jupiter eventually becomes so huge that it turns into a star. It actually turns into a star. It actually, nuclear fusion ignites, and it becomes a small star. This essentially makes the solar system a binary stellar system. Now, the Earth solar system is quite unusual in the sense that the Sun is not in a gravitational relationship with any other star. It's not thought to be anyway. Some people say, "Oh no, there's this thing called Nemesis," but no, I will leave that aside for now. The Sun sits alone in space with planets orbiting it. Now, many other solar systems are made up of not just planets orbiting a star, but smaller stars orbiting the star. Isaac Asimov has written this great book called Nightfall, which is set on an alien planet where there's like about 6 different stars. It's really, really good, that. But what happens is the solar system becomes a system of 2 stars, and this makes Earth very, very different. That means there's 2 suns in the sky. So where Jupiter used to be, there's like a second sun, which means there's much less night time. And in fact, sometimes of the year, it's like the North or South Pole. There's just never a time when either sun sets. So at any time when both the Sun and Jupiter are up, wherever you are on the Earth, where Jupiter is up, even if the Sun is down, you'll still have daylight, because this Sun is there. And you know what they call this Sun? They call it Lucifer. Now, Lucifer in Gnostic terms is the demiurge, the Rex Mundi. There's several other words for it. The Metatron. It's the lesser god. And according in Gnostic terms, like with the Cathars, they believe that the lesser god. This is the god that the Freemasons called Jabulon, was actually the creator of the world. According to the Freemasons, they call God a god, the God you worship in church, Jehovah, as they say. If you don't get stoned to death for blasphemy, like in Monty Python, that is called Adonai. They have 2 words for God. Adonai is God, what most other people recognize as God. Yet they have another word called Jabulon. Jabulon is Lucifer. The first Illuminati film by Christopher Everard talks about this in great detail. And it is Jabulon that created the universe, which means the universe is an impure, is a deviant creation, an impure creation. Several other people have talked about this. This is a very, very interesting concept. I recommend Amitak Stanford, who's an Australian lady who talks about the demiurge. Her in particular, this idea. So, in a sense, what Arthur C. Clarke was symbolizing, I don't know if he realized this, but he was actually symbolizing an alchemical Gnostic creation in this book, this amazing book, 2010: A Space Odyssey. Now, this here is the Galileo spacecraft. This was launched in 1989. It was actually released by a space shuttle in orbit and headed for Jupiter. When it got to Jupiter, it did pretty much the same thing that Cassini did around Saturn. It orbited for a while and gathered lots of scientific data. It was a research mission. And at the end of its lifespan, when its fuel ran out, NASA decided that they would deorbit it on the planet Jupiter. Exactly the same way they're going to do Cassini on Friday, and indeed for the same reasons. They didn't want its plutonium-238 fuel pellets, decayed fuel pellets, from polluting space around Jupiter. And this is a concern for life. Obviously, if there's life on some of the planets, it could poison that. But also for future astronauts, if there's ever a manned mission to Jupiter in the distant future, the last thing you want when you get there is for the astronauts to land on the moon, land on Ganymede or something, and find these pellets of poisonous radioactive material there. It'll kill them all. So they decided to crash, basically crash Galileo into Jupiter. And they did. It was deorbited and it crashed into Jupiter. It entered Jupiter's atmosphere and it burned up. It burned up on the 14th of April 2004. So that, in a sense, was, from their point of view, it's the sensible thing to do. However, something strange happened. So Galileo crashed into the planet Jupiter. But 28 days later, nothing to do with zombies, that's another video. 28 days later, 28 days after the Galileo probe had crashed on Jupiter, a mysterious black spot appeared on the planet's surface. It was captured by this ground-based telescope image, as you can see here. You can see it in the lower equatorial band there of Jupiter's clouds. This is very, very unknown. It was not known exactly what caused this. This black spot was huge. It was about 4,000 miles across. So it's a good half the size of the Earth or so. Now it looks small there, but the reason it looks so small is because Jupiter is such a huge planet. You could fit 1,000 Earths inside this planet. Jupiter, of course, is the biggest of the planets in the solar system by far. It is a huge gas giant. Now there was some concern over what this might be. Well, what caused it was a bit of a mystery. There's been several occasions where black spots have appeared on Jupiter, not least when the comet Shoemaker-Levy crashed into it, but no comet had crashed into Jupiter when this happened. Now, it became even more mysterious when suddenly they worked out, these scientists and astronomers worked out, that the black spot had appeared exactly at the place where the Galileo spacecraft had hit the planet. And of course the question is there a connection? Is there a connection between the impact of Galileo and this particular event? I mean, it's a completely and utterly understandable question to ask. It was a bit of a mystery because no one said, well, how could just a small spacecraft, the size of a double-decker bus, possibly create this big black spot? And then the question was, well, has it got something to do with the fuel pellets? These 17 pounds of plutonium-238. Is it possible this speculation occurred? Now, most people, scientists, deny this, but is it possible that somehow during this descent into the atmosphere of Jupiter, these fuel pellets achieved critical mass, which meant that a runaway nuclear fission reaction took place of the kind you get in the heart of a nuclear bomb. And as a result, did this atomic explosion then cause the hydrogen of Jupiter's atmosphere to begin a fusion reaction in the same way that a hydrogen bomb does on Earth? Because once that's worrying, because once, as you see in bombs on the Earth, once the hydrogen all starts fusing, it starts a chain reaction which leads to the explosion. And you know how big nuclear bombs can get nowadays. I mean, the Soviet Union detonated one in 1960 called the Emperor bomb, which was 60 megatons. It blew out windows in Finland. So the explosion generator could be huge. So is what we are looking at here the remnants of a nuclear explosion, a hydrogen, an atomic, started as an atomic chain reaction and led to a hydrogen fusion reaction, an atomic fission reaction, led to an atomic fusion reaction? Is that what we're looking at here? And that's what that black spot is. And this is where it gets a bit worrying, because this is a still from the film 2010 A Space Odyssey, the sequel to 2001. As I said, it wasn't directed by Stanley Kubrick, it was directed by Peter Hyams, starred Roy Scheider. And you see here a very similar situation. Now, when the monolith goes back down onto the surface of Jupiter, the human astronauts have to get out. They have to escape as soon as possible. And they're not told why, but they soon find out later on. They discover why. It's because Jupiter has turned into this star. But you see here a big black blotch on the surface of Jupiter. It starts as a small spot, and expands into this huge black blotch. And this is the first stage where the monolith is growing. The monolith actually creates copies of itself, and that's what the big black spot is, converting the hydrogen in Jupiter's atmosphere and in its surface and in its core into heavier elements. It's not a fusion reaction, but it does effectively do the same thing. It turns Jupiter into a star. Now, you might think, well, what's a story? What's that got to do with real life? Well, what it has to do with real life is it's uncannily similar to what we see after the explosion on Jupiter, if that's what it was, caused by the impact of the Galileo probe. There are some differences. I mean, the black spot eventually vanished; it disappeared. The explosion caused by Galileo, if indeed it was an explosion caused by Galileo, did not do any more damage than cause that big black spot. However, the question remains: Arthur C. Clarke, like Stanley Kubrick, had an uncanny ability to almost predict what was happening in the future. A lot of his novels are set in the future. They were written. He started writing in the 1940s through, and most of his best work was in the 1940s to the 1960s. But they described the world 50 to a century in the future. So, and he was uncannily accurate in his predictions. For example, he wrote a book in the early 70s called Imperial Earth, which had like an internet. And this occurred several other times, and there was lots of other predictions which came true. And I've got to ask the question: Clarke seemed to have this ability to know the world, to depict reality in his fiction, reality in years hence. Is that what's happened? The question is: are we looking at that now? Are we looking at a situation in which that he predicted what would have been an explosion on Jupiter caused by the impact of the Galileo probe, and this accidentally or otherwise generated nuclear explosion, and the creation of a star, which the only thing he got wrong was it didn't happen. Jupiter did not become a star. And this is a page online from Universe Today. Universe Today is space astronomy news. It's an online magazine, and this is an article about the Cassini mission written by Ian O'Neill on Christmas Eve 2015, and it talks about the possibility that will Cassini turn Saturn into a second sun. And this, of course, is, by now, this is where I'm going. If what happened with Galileo failed to turn Jupiter into a second sun, whatever nuclear reaction took place in the atmosphere of Jupiter when Galileo entered it, which is a possibility, then will we see the same thing on Friday? Will there be a nuclear reaction within Saturn as Cassini hits it? Now, you'll be, if you want to be comforted, then you should read this article, because it explains, according to this guy O'Neill, that this couldn't happen. And he claims that the black spot that was seen on Jupiter was actually just a shadow from one of the moons, or it's something like that. It was a shadow from one of the Jovian moons and things like that. This, of course, could be true, and I hope it is. I hope very much that this is actually the case. This is actually a 3-part article, so you can go on and you can read some more. And I had a quick look through this, and it is comforting reading. It's comforting reading. It claims that simply couldn't happen. There's absolutely no chance that Saturn could sustain nuclear fusion, even if a nuclear fission bond detonating inside this dense hydrogen body of this planet could happen. And that is simply because Saturn is too small. The hydrogen is the wrong type, and it's what's known as diatomic molecular hydrogen, so it can't fuse. And there's only certain isotopes of hydrogen can fuse, like deuterium, things like that. And it goes on to say that because Saturn is very, very tenuous, it's actually the most it's actually the least dense planet in the solar system. If you could take a little bit of it, you could float it on water. It's less dense than water, most of it, on average. So, well, I hope that's true. I really do. I hope that's true, and if it is, I'll be extremely happy. So I hope Dr. O'Neill, or Professor O'Neill, or whatever his name is correct. I would hate for this. Obviously, I don't want to see this happen. Then again, what if he's wrong? What if it's not? What if that's not the case? What if Saturn could, in fact, turn into a huge hydrogen bomb when the fuel, if the fuel happens to react in a certain way? Remember, the fuel load of Cassini is much bigger. The fuel load of Galileo was 17 pounds. With Cassini, it's 78 pounds. It's a much bigger plutonium-238 fuel load. I suppose the big question is why? Why would they do it? Okay, let's go crazy. Alright, let's just for a change, alright, let's just put our tinfoil hats on, firmly attach them to our head, and let's just suggest that maybe if it's being done deliberately. Lucifer. Now, Lucifer is the name given to the new sun in the sky in the Space Odyssey series by Arthur C. Clarke. And I read the third one as well, 2061: A Space Odyssey, which carries it on from there, where they send another mission into the system, which is now a mini solar system, and the moons have all warmed up, things like that. It's a very interesting book. That's probably the best one of the series, I'd say. But Lucifer, as I said, is in the Gnostic tradition, the occult tradition, is the demiurge. It's symbolised sometimes by the planet Venus, and it's called the bringer of light. Lucifer, the bringer of light. And as I said, in many situations, I mean, Lucifer appears in the Paradise Lost, John Milton's Paradise Lost. Indeed, this is an illustration from Paradise Lost. This is this image you see before you now, which shows Lucifer in that story. Lucifer is not the same thing as Satan, which is something that traditional religion doesn't realise. Traditional religion of, for instance, Christianity, Islam, I don't know about Judaism, but Islam and Christianity certainly see this binary vision of the God versus good and evil, God versus Satan, Allah versus the evil one, whatever they call it, whatever the Muslims call that. I can't remember what their word for Satan, shaitan, I think they call it. The devil and God, good and evil, etc. and that. I mean, Judaism's different. I think Judaism has this idea of God, Jehovah, and there's I don't know exactly how it goes from there. Basically, this is an old story which is can be found mostly in older religious texts rather than something the vicar will tell you down the church on a Sunday. But as I said, this is considered to be in the what's it called, the Gnostic tradition, Lucifer is said to be the creator of the world. So it's possible that in a Luciferian sense, the Illuminati might do this as for occult rituals. They might create a second star in the solar system as a massive, huge occult ritual. This is the interesting thing. This is why they might want to do this. This is the question. Here we see a very simplified diagram of a binary star system. This would be a basic, very basic image of what our solar system would be like if it had two stars in it. What would happen is, if the Cassini mission ends as in the creation of Lucifer, as this Lucifer Project by the Illuminati is said to do, then you will end up with a second sun in the sky. As I said, where Saturn is now, there will be a star. Now there's many reasons not to want this to happen and to be concerned that this would happen. Firstly, if it is some kind of occult ritual by the Illuminati, then it's bad news for us. It's a black magic. It's a black magic spell, basically, that probably means a lot of harm for the Earth and its inhabitants on a spiritual level. But also on a practical level, there are reasons not to want this to happen. Firstly, it would be very sad to lose Saturn. I mean, Saturn, as it is an object of wonder. It's the most well-known planet in the solar system because of its ring system. It's very beautiful, and I wouldn't want to see it destroyed in its present form. It has a hexagon on its pole. If you remember the hexagonal thing on its pole. In fact, I'll show you a picture of that actually. This is actually a picture captured by Cassini of the North Pole of Saturn, and you see here this distinct hexagonal shape. It is a strange regular hexagon in the cloud cover of the North Pole of Saturn. And funnily enough, when Voyager went past Saturn in the late 1970s, it captured the same thing. So it's lasted a long time, this hexagon. Now, no one knows exactly how this could happen. It's a regular shape. It's very, very big. It's about twice the size of the Earth. It's thousands of miles along each side. Some people say, oh, it's a standing wave in the atmosphere. It's hard to know. Or it may be some kind of... Well, Richard Hoagland has talked about this as being hyperdimensional effect. Perhaps Saturn is a beacon of positive energy to bring into the solar system. I don't want to sound too new age and flaky, but maybe that is what it is. In which case, that is why the Illuminati would want to destroy it, because they don't want beacons of positive energy in the solar system. I don't know, David Icke's now talking about how Saturn is the control system. I don't know about that. But either way, I mean, I don't want to see this turned into some thing that's just a smaller copy of the Sun. That'd be boring. It'd be sad. It'd be sad to lose what we've got now. Another reason is, what would it mean for life on Earth? This is a question, and this is something that's explored in the book by Arthur C. Clarke in the series in 2010 and 2061 Odyssey 3. Well, you'd be seeing two suns in the sky, not all the time, but some of the time. Basically, as I said, if the only time there wouldn't be any sun in the sky, there'd be either one or both suns. The only time there wouldn't be would be when Saturn and the Sun have both set. Only then would you be able to experience nighttime as we currently know it. This would change the Earth enormously, and Clarke talks about this in the books. He says that there's some species of turtle that will go extinct because they need long hours of darkness in order to mate and procreate and things like that. It may cause trouble with our sleep patterns. We may end up suffering from insomnia, because it's a very well-known fact that the human sleep cycle, and indeed that of other animals, is governed by the rising and setting of the sun, light levels and things like that. We would need to have blackout blinds on our windows to sleep some nights. This would affect other animals too. I mean, owls and things like that wouldn't be able to hunt properly, and there's all kinds of things that could go wrong. And what about radiation? What would happen to the radiation levels in the Earth's atmosphere, in its body, in its ionosphere? We may end up with more geomagnetic storms. We may end up with a depletion of the ozone layer. We may end up with all kinds of things. We may end up with a pole shift. All kinds of things like that might happen, and that might be part of the Illuminati's plan. So this is another reason not to want this to happen. It really is. And there may be a connection between the Lucifer Project, if that's what it is, and other things that are going on at the moment. And this time, some other strange Illuminati things are happening on Earth. I'm talking about CERN. Now, I've done an entire video on CERN. I'll put a link in the description box to my video on CERN. In fact, I'm going to put a little note here just to remind myself, because I often forget to put links in. Okay, so I'll put here CERN. Okay, so I'll put my CERN video as a link in the description box so you can watch the whole thing about CERN. Because I've done, like I said, I've done an entire feature-length video on CERN. I've done an entire radio show on Panmo Radio about CERN. But we see things as CERN is operating now, and you have that Professor Brian Cox, his big shiny white teeth, saying how wonderful it is, when in fact there are reasons to be concerned about this particular thing, the Large Hadron Collider, this enormous particle accelerator at the laboratory in Switzerland, and what it could do. Now, since CERN has been operating, there's been some concerns that mini black holes might be produced, strangelets. I go into that in detail in the CERN movie in the link in the description box. However, since I made that film, there's been new revelations about, for instance, the Mandela effect, which could be a breakdown in the stable nature of this particular universe. In other words, we keep flitting in and out of parallel universes, and possibly it's a result of the actions of CERN. Now, is it possible that CERN and the creation of Lucifer are linked on an occult or even radioactive or practical level? I don't know, or maybe it's got something to do with the quantum physics and the interdimensional portals and things like that. That's a question I can't answer right now, but it's another possibility. It's another reason why, if the Lucifer Project is a real thing, then it's bad news for us, and we don't want it to happen. So, that's the question. That's the basic outline of this issue. So, that's it. What will happen on Friday? Well, I'm fairly confident I will reach home first safely. I'll be able to take part in the UFO Truth Magazine conference. I better, because I've worked really hard at it, I'll tell you. And that we won't suddenly have a second sun in the sky when I make my way home on Monday. If something like this happens, it probably won't happen instantaneously. If there's some enormous huge fusion explosion on Saturn and it becomes a star, it'll probably be like I don't know, it'll probably take another 28 days or 28 weeks. Another zombie film. Is this some sort of joke where the radiation turns us all into zombies or something, and we end up in the sort of like zombie apocalypse? I've done an entire video on zombies, and I'm not putting a link in the description box to that because you can find it. Now I'm not going to miss any sleep over this, and I don't want you to miss any sleep either. I don't want you to lie awake biting your nails thinking, oh my god, that Ben the J.R. Porter scared me. No, I don't want that to happen. I'm not that concerned about this, to be honest. When I first started writing about this many years ago, my first article on this, I'll put a link in the description box to that. I first started writing about this in 2007 when I was just starting out with Hapanwo. Since then I've learned a lot more, and I actually think that the article in Universe Today is fairly persuasive. I've learned a little bit about how nuclear explosions happen, and I don't think that it could happen. I mean, there's nuclear explosions could only happen under very controlled conditions. Certain types of hydrogen fuel at a certain pressure, a certain temperature, etc. And the same with the fission, like the pellets. These fuel pellets are not the same as the plutonium pits of a nuclear bomb. So therefore, I doubt this could happen. But as always, there's this little niggle at the back of my mind. But to be honest, it's pretty much an outside shot. So I thought I'd make this film to mention it, and I did say at the time that when this happened I would actually cover it, but I wouldn't worry too much. I think the Illuminati have very different ideas for us. I don't see what would be gained by this, especially if it turns out that we find out about it and we realise who did it and things like that. And again, this is rather like CERN, because again it's something that we're not really able to stop. We don't have any power over this. But there are forces for good at work in this world as well as for evil. And that's the point. And I don't believe that we're alone. I don't believe that it's just us and us versus the Illuminati. I do think that we have the possibility of having some help from people out there who are on our side. If there are any passing friendly aliens, maybe they could catch the craft before it hits Saturn or something like that. I mean, wouldn't they do that? I mean, I don't believe in alien saviors coming to rescue us, but is it possible that they, if they offer that, if they happen to be passing and they offer to lend a hand, I'll happily swallow my pride and accept. We'll see what happens. I might make another video about this subject if need be. If not, if nothing happens, then this will be my last word on the matter, I promise you. So I hope to see you in Holfirth, right? There are still a few tickets left. If you're watching this film before Saturday the 16th, then please do get your ticket and come to home for see the UFO Truth Magazine conference. I'm going to be speaking on Saturday morning, but there's lots of other really interesting speakers, and it'd be great to see you there. Come along and introduce yourself. So thank you for watching Hapanwo TV. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity, stop the New World Order.